Shingi here with the Soba DeFi, and COP is now over. It's been a pretty intense 2 weeks. There have been a lot of heated discussions. A lot of the topics that we thought were going to be covered were in fact covered. There were some interesting resolutions. There were some things where the can has been kicked over to COP28 next year in Dubai. And we're going to do a quick rundown of all of those things. But I want to also use this as an opportunity to highlight and compare and contrast what we see in COP27 and what we expect to see in COP28 with things that are happening in parallel within the climate blockchain space. And the reason why I want to make that comparison is I want to just highlight again and again the opportunity that we do have to not be dependent or not have to wait on the resolutions that happen at this state level or at this government to government level to really make a meaningful impact in this climate space. But first, just to debrief and recap what went down at COP27 over the 2 weeks. So one of the key hot button issues that I anticipated was going to be discussed was the compensation for damage caused in developing world nations or global south nations by climate change, and specifically by anthropogenic climate change. So the battleground that I anticipated was that global south countries would push the high emission countries of the global north, in particular North America as well as Europe, to provide some form of quote unquote climate justice type of compensation, a fund if you will, to address and to deploy in the damage recovery as a result of major climate change events. I expected that to be the biggest fault line, and we were not disappointed. That's exactly how things went down. But what did surprise me was the fact that there were concessions actually made. Now, what I expected to have happen was that Western countries would push back and push for more dialogue, or to push for a very vague, high-level goal to come back to actually discuss. But that did not happen. In fact, what in fact happened was a loss and damage fund. Now, this loss and damage fund is essentially a fund that's specifically designed to pay up losses and damage caused by anthropogenic climate change to natural and human systems. So the fund itself, there was a commitment by participants to actually set up the fund. At this point, though, we haven't seen specific dollar amounts tied to that. And I suspect that that's going to be a topic of conversation in COP28. The details, who's going to pay into that, proportionally how that's going to work out, those are all details that are going to need to be hashed out. But it's a step in the direction that I expected to happen, simply because of the amount of leverage that we're seeing across the global south when it comes to the clean energy transition. Now, speaking of clean energy transition, another piece of subtext that we anticipated was the push for commitment towards abandonment of fossil fuels altogether. There was not a uniform agreement upon that. I think something like 80 countries did make a voiced commitment to doing so, but COP as a body did not agree to anything concretely. Coal was the biggest fossil fuel that was under attack. But again, if you recall the video that I made in the look forward to COP27, we have countries, especially China and India, who have a high need of essentially any form of energy generation because of the high population needs that they do have. On top of that, though, there are a number of African nations that do have either significant coal reserves, or Zimbabwe, for example, has enough coal for several hundreds of years at the very least, right? So you have energy poor countries that do have significant deposits of not just coal, but also, for example, Zimbabwe. The Australian company Invictus is prospecting for oil. You have natural gas reserves found off the coast of Tanzania. You have oil reserves found in DR Congo. You have a number of African countries in particular that have significant fossil fuel reserves, and you combine that with the energy poverty that they do have in terms of huge capacity shortfalls, you can see how it's very difficult to get a block of such countries to commit to abandonment of fossil fuels, right? And to be frank, that's kind of pushing the cart before the horse. I think it's one thing to be Sweden and to say that. It's a very different thing to be a country like Tanzania, which has less than 50% of the population that has access to the grid. And you are heavily reliant on heavy subsidies for the cost of electricity to even get, 20, 30, 40% of your population to be even able to afford, even if they were connected to the grid, actually to buy electricity. So as you can see, there is extreme stratification in terms of the economic and energy capacity conditions of countries. And you can see that the fault lines essentially were created along those specific lines. So those were two pretty significant takeaways and outcomes from COP. But I think the notable omission is in fact the high level focused commitment to limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. From a climate science perspective, there is strong evidence to suggest that we've probably lost our chance at 1.5 degrees, and now the target is really 2 degrees. But in any case, regardless of where the science sat, there was no really meaningful conviction within the group around really setting goals around that and really holding themselves accountable to that. So where does that leave us, right? We had 2 weeks of conversations. We have all the time global temperatures accelerating. All the time CO2 emissions are increasing. We have commitment to doing something significant, the Loss and Damage Fund. We have some level of fractured commitment to elimination of fossil fuels. But in reality, there are so many diverse sets of interests that are represented within this group that, even when we come back to some of those other conversations that have been tabled, in Dubai next year, it doesn't seem likely that there's going to be significant movement. Because again, there's a lag between what COP decides and then the national policies that come after that support the goals and thresholds that are set. So it really does look like there is not a lot of meaningful movement, at least in the level of urgency that is required to really address and hit some of the targets that we've been talking about. So I want to contrast that with the event that we had last week, ReFi Meets the World. Now, I don't want to pretend that the event that we threw has anywhere close to the same scale or scope as the event COP27 that has national leaders from across the world. But what I do want to highlight is, even as the market cap for crypto right now has shrunk due to recent events and due to the bear market in general, we still have close to $1 trillion worth of liquidity within the entire system. And the vast majority of that liquidity is not being put to active use. In fact, it's sitting in cold storage, essentially just waiting for the bear market to thaw and for crypto winter to end. So we have a lot of capital that is capable of being deployed for a lot of climate initiatives, but right now it's just sitting on the sidelines. Part of the goal that I had with ReFi Meets the World was to bring at least a few of the bigger names within the climate, crypto, or Web3 space to talk about what their focuses are, what the goals are over the next 12 months, and what are some of the things that we can kind of come together in terms of agreement around concerted action and collaborative action. And I think to that end, I think we were pretty successful about that. So just as a quick rundown of our event. So we had 3 panels, and then we had a number of projects that also came and just presented what they were doing, and we had some AMAs. And I'll provide the links to all of those sessions. They're all on YouTube on Jimbo Slicer, who shout out to the co-host for that event, on his YouTube channel. So I'll provide links to that so you can check out all of those sessions and you can actually hear the details of what went on, because I think these are phenomenal sessions. You should absolutely do that. But just as a little bit of a summary, so we had the first session which was focused on governance within the Web3 climate space. And we had Yi Luo, who is running a stealth mode right now Web3 startup that's focused on the S and G in ESG, so the social and governance part. The goal is really to provide more information for investors doing diligence on projects, which is absolutely essential. We also had KlimaDAO, who also came on to talk also about the ESG and how that relates to what they're doing with verified carbon markets. And both of them had really strong perspectives that were really enlightening. And I think when we got to the point where we talked about what are the goals or targets for the next 12 months, we got some really interesting answers. I think the big one though, there were some specifics that were specific to like KlimaDAO's, verified carbon markets goal and Yi's goals as well. But the one that really stood out, and this is going to be a theme across all of these events and all of these AMAs, is that they wanted to increase significantly the number of stakeholders within their DAO, and that translates into things like engagement, etc. So they wanted to double the number of members or voters specifically within their DAO. So obviously that has liquidity impacts, but moreover, it just has more people that are engaged and actually have a stake in the decisions that are made with that particular market. So we all then following that, we had Tony Tiu of Renewables in Africa, and we talked there about the role of blockchain in terms of financing clean energy transition. And so he operates just like Asoba does within Africa. His focus is more in West Africa, and he had a lot of information to share about what some of the gaps are and where blockchain can really provide support with regard to financing. Because there's a major financing gap for a lot of projects. That's the critical barrier, in fact, to the deployment of clean energy, at least in Africa. But I imagine that it's true across the world as well. And so, the goal from his perspective was really, again, about engaging more project developers and bringing them together into a space for them to be able to connect more directly with potential investors from the blockchain space. And it's really about finding a space, a convener space in terms of how they're able to do those engagements and interactions and actually draw capital to the projects. And so that did raise some light bulbs for us, and it gave us some interesting ideas. TBD on what those are. We actually have a strong idea, but I don't want to ruin it yet. But we have some interesting news around that coming soon. So after Tony, we had Moss, and Moss is another carbon offset blockchain project. They're based in Brazil. They do a tremendous amount within the verified carbon market space, but they also do a lot of work in the ecosystem conservation. And so a lot of their focus, going over the next 12 months, is really around expanding the tokenization of carbon credits from an ecosystem perspective, and not just clean energy projects. So they want to diversify essentially the portfolio of sources of carbon credits, as well as standardization of how those are tokenized. We have then next had DClimate, which is another data platform. They have a tremendous database of different data sets that are supportive to climate innovators to actually help them understand problem domains across the world. Very, 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 very fascinating project that they have. I'm really excited that they were able to jump on and kind of talk about what they were working on. And I think from their perspective, similar to Moss, like they really wanted to focus on a lot of ecosystem preservation. They have a lot of data sets, satellite aerial imagery of forests. Some of their initial use cases were supporting farmers in terms of the most climate efficient ways of managing crops and managing their land. And I think that what they're looking at in the next 12 months is going to be the continuation of that and bringing, again, more stakeholders to the table to actually use the data sets that they have. And then we also had Regen Foundation and BCOWG working. It was Prana who came and talked to us about both of those organizations and their role in being facilitators of interoperability standards. First from a tokenized carbon market perspective, but they do want to expand out of that beyond just carbon markets into other spaces. And again, clean energy transition and helping finance that was another theme that popped up there. Then we also had ESG DAO. So David Aikman from ESG DAO came on to talk to us about bringing more subject matter experts into crypto. Again, this is something that that I made another point about, and it was interesting that both David and I are newcomers to Web3. Our backgrounds are in subject matter expertise, and we came to Web3 because we saw the potential and opportunity for Web3 to make an impact in that particular space. And ESG DAO, very similar to what Yi Luo is working on, is looking at making data around ESG more available. So investors, retail investors, institutional investors who are doing due diligence on projects can actually see, how full of BS a project is when it comes to like their ESG claims. But across the board, again, my goal of this event was to identify what those common threads are, to identify meaningful, tangible goals that we can like hold on to, and then start to socialize those. And I think from my end, I think the biggest takeaway that I had was that we need to bring more stakeholders, both investors, so people that are interested in putting their money towards something that was climate impactful, but then also from subject matter experts who are doing climate innovation and who are doing it in a silo or doing it alone or trying to boil the ocean. But I think that the common thread here is you have these organizations that are providing the backbone and the spine for that sort of cross-blockchain collaboration, cross-chain collaboration, cross-token type collaboration, cross-innovation sector collaboration to really bring all these efforts under sort of a concerted umbrella. And I think what's more encouraging about this than COP is that these are all people that are actually in it, that are doing the innovation, and that they want to do it, and they're motivated to do it, and they're aggressively trying to bring capital towards it. They're not trying to protect vested interests in fossil fuels or an old economy. So I think that's where we have a lot of opportunity to, for the next 12 months, really focus on bringing a significant chunk of new stakeholders, both from the climate innovation side as well as the investor side. And so from my perspective, I really want to focus Asoba DeFi's efforts over the next year, not just on raising financing for the projects that we have in terms of the feasibility studies, but also working with developers across the African continent to provide a platform for them to be able to access capital via blockchain. So that's the area where we're going to be focusing our energy over the next 12 months to really identify avenues and opportunities that we can leverage blockchain to be able to do that. Now, our goal is to be able to get 20 additional solar or other clean energy developers together within an organization or coalition to be able to collectively funnel financing towards projects. Now, what that looks like, what the shape of that is, there's a bit of research that we're working on that we're going to do, but that's the commitment that I have to get that 20. To get, we still have to figure out what the capital, what the capital raised realistically can be. But I think if we can target 20 additional climate or clean energy organizations across Africa to be able to be participatory in this, then I think that we will be able to make a meaningful difference in the clean energy transition, at least in one continent. But that's something that I want to be able to tie into the efforts that the many illustrious other projects that came to our event have been doing and will be continuing to do over the next 12 months. And this is certainly a conversation that I want to keep moving and keep going forward, over the next 12 months. So my goal is this time next year, we'll have the events on Discord as well, but I also want to have some of this to take place in person in Zanzibar. And we may need to switch the timing up because I know a number of the organizations we talked to had a presence at COP, and I expect that in Dubai it's going to be the same thing. So I want to make sure that we don't have a conflicting schedule because I do want to have in-person collaboration and to actually have people meet each other across these different sectors, so it's not just dominated by voluntary carbon markets, but we have clean energy, we have other aspects of climate change, innovation represented as well. But those are the takeaways that we have. I think there are a lot of really promising directions that we can go over the next 12 months. All of these projects can expect to hear from us early and often. Will be a gadfly for sure, but we really want to make make sure that this collaboration does in fact happen, that projects aren't just working in silos, but that we do take time to align on high-level goals and to support each other where necessary. So that's the commitment that I'm going to make, and hopefully the other attendees who were so generous with their time can also commit to some of that as well. I know that they're working their butts off to hit their core mission. So, hopefully we can all work together and show COP like an actual model of like, here's how this can work across global North and global South, across different industries, across different countries, languages, you name it. Anyway, thank you for watching. We're really passionate about this, if you can't tell. Like and subscribe. If you have thoughts, drop them in the comments, and we'll see you next time.